Mystery, betrayal, resistance, conflict. These words define one of the most haunting chapters of American history. And it's not just about the soldiers or battles. It's about the deep, unshakable tensions between two worlds destined to collide. This story takes us back to a moment in time where the wilderness whispered warnings and every shadow held a secret. It was December 1835, and over 100 soldiers of Major Francis Dade's column marched through the sweltering heat of Central Florida's dense pine forests. Their mission was to reinforce Fort King, a critical outpost in the U.S. government's campaign to remove the Seminole people from their ancestral lands. But this was no ordinary march. This was no routine maneuver. Beneath the surface, this journey was a thread in a web of treachery, defiance, and survival. It wasn't just a military operation. It was the prelude to a conflict that would echo through history. What happened on that sandy path remains shrouded in both horror and intrigue. What secrets did the wilderness hold? And why did this moment mark a turning point in a forgotten war? Welcome to Through the Ages. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Today we're telling you the untold story of betrayal, resilience, and the indomitable human spirit. Let's uncover the truth step by step. It all began on a crisp December morning back in 1835 when the usual buzz of wildlife in Florida's pine and palmetto woods fell silent. The cool air carried an unnatural stillness, broken only by the stealthy movements of 180 Seminole warriors lying in wait. Hidden in the thick brush on the west side of the road, they prepared to strike. The faint clinking of metal and the rhythmic crunch of boots on the road signaled their target was near. 107 U.S. Army soldiers, led by Major Francis L. Drake. These men had left Fort Brooke near Tampa Bay 6 days earlier, marching toward Fort King, now Ocala, to reinforce its garrison. But their path cut straight through land claimed by the Seminoles, a place now bubbling with tension and bloodshed. As the soldiers drew closer, the Seminole chief Micanopy crouched in the tall grass, rifle in hand, his sights locked on Major Dade. The soldiers had no clue what was coming. One pull of the trigger shattered the quiet, Micanopy's shot signaling warriors to unleash hell on the unsuspecting troop. This wasn't the first time blood had been spilled between the U.S. Army and the Seminoles in Florida. After the American War for Independence, settlers crossing into Spanish-controlled Florida clashed with native groups who were also harboring runaway slaves. This angered the Southern elites, who pressured the government to do something. The skirmishes escalated into a full-blown conflict in 1817 when 41 soldiers and settlers were killed in North Florida. President James Monroe, not one to let things slide, ordered an expedition, in his words, to take revenge against the Indians. Enter General Andrew Jackson, who didn't just fight, he bulldozed his way through. The First Seminole War of 1817 and 1818 was over almost as soon as it began, with Jackson steamrolling Seminole resistance. But Jackson wasn't satisfied. He turned his wrath on the Spanish, capturing their outposts one by one, claiming Florida piece by piece. This wasn't exactly the plan. Monroe was pleased with the Seminole defeat, but Jackson's overreach into Spanish territory didn't sit well with Washington. Still, his aggressive campaign laid the groundwork for the U.S. to take control of Florida, officially turning it into a U.S. territory in 1821. For the Seminoles, though, it marked the beginning of the end. After Florida became U.S. territory, the government wasted no time pressuring the Seminoles to pack up and move west. The Treaty of Moultrie Creek in 1823 forced the Seminoles onto a reservation in Central Florida, promising food rations and the right to stay there for 20 years. But the land was terrible. Poor soil, droughts, and not enough to eat drove many Seminoles off the reservation within months. Others, like the fierce Miccosukee chief Neamathla, refused to be confined from the start. His hatred for white settlers ran deep. "Even since I was a small boy," he wrote, "I've watched them steal our land and destroy our way of life. If I could, I'd cut the throat of every white man in Florida tonight." By the late 1820s, violence between settlers and Seminoles was spiraling out of control. Settlers pushed for Congress to remove all Seminoles from Florida, and the government responded by building forts. First Fort King in 1827 near Silver Springs, and then a connecting road to Fort Brooke a year later. As tensions escalated, the U.S. government intensified efforts to relocate the Seminoles. The Treaty of Payne's Landing in 1832 aimed to push Seminole leaders into inspecting land in the Indian Territory. However, many believed that delegation was only shown in the most attractive areas. This led to the Treaty of Fort Gibson, which imposed a strict timeline for Seminole removal, but the treaty's legitimacy was marred by allegations of bribery. Resistance flared with militant Seminoles, led by Osceola, rejecting the terms and citing earlier agreements like the Treaty of Moultrie Creek. Wiley Thompson, the new Indian agent, struggled to enforce compliance. Arresting Osceola only fueled the leader's resentment and resolve for revenge. Osceola's defiance soon turned violent. He ambushed and killed Chief Charlie Amathla, a relocation supporter, spreading panic among settlers and Indians alike. As fear gripped Florida, hundreds of Seminoles sought refuge at Fort Brooke, while violence erupted across the region. In December 1835, Osceola led 80 warriors in ambushing a supply train near Gainesville, marking the first major battle of the Second Seminole War. Dubbed the Battle of Black Point, the Seminoles killed 14 settlers, then vanished before reinforcements arrived. This skirmish highlighted the growing strategy of raids and ambushes under Osceola and other Seminole leaders. General Clinch's missteps soon played into Osceola's hands. Clinch weakened Fort King's defenses by garrisoning Fort Drane with troops from Fort King, creating an opening for Osceola to strike. Meanwhile, an order for reinforcements to march from Fort Brooke to Fort King through hostile territory alarmed officers, but Clinch's directive left no room for delay. On December 23, 1835, two companies led by Captains Gardiner and Fraser departed Fort Brooke with limited ammunition and a single 6-pounder cannon. Despite warnings of ambushes from Seminole leader McCanopy, they ventured into the heart of enemy territory, setting the stage for disaster. Dade's men, Seminole scouts, sent by leaders Osceola and Alligator, observed their every move. 4 miles up the road, Dade's column came to an abrupt halt. The oxen pulling their 6-pounder cannon were already exhausted and refused to move. Dade, an experienced infantryman, decided to abandon the cannon. The oxen were hitched to the supply wagon instead, leaving the men casting nervous glances at one another. They had covered only 4 miles and already lost their artillery. Nevertheless, they pressed on, reaching the Little Hillsborough River in time to prepare camp before dark. The soldiers felled tall pines to construct a 3-log-high wall around their camp as a precaution against potential Seminole attack. Fires were lit and rations consumed. Back at Fort Brooke, Captain Belton hired a slave named Louis Pacheco, fluent in Seminole, English, Spanish, and French, as a scout and interpreter for $25 a month. Pacheco was sent to catch up with Dade's column. Meanwhile, Gardiner, having insured his wife's transport to Key West for medical care, returned to retrieve the abandoned cannon with 2 men and a team of horses. By 9 p.m., they reached the camp at the river, lifting spirits as the artillerymen reacquired their prized gun. The following day, Dade sent Pacheco ahead to scout the road. 5 miles out, Pacheco discovered a destroyed trading post, a smoldering bridge, and a slaughtered cow, a deliberate warning. Reporting back to Dade, Pacheco voiced his concerns, but the major dismissed the incident as the work of a spiteful escapee, Bowlegs. Dade ordered his men to ford the river, a laborious process that required hauling the wagon and cannon across by rope. The column advanced cautiously through dense oak and hickory woods, wary of an ambush. Upon reaching open pine barrens, the men's spirits lifted. It was Christmas Day, and confidence surged as they increased their pace. That evening, the soldiers camped near Hagerman's Hole, constructing defensive barriers once again. Pacheco, scouting ahead, reported abundant signs of Seminole activity. The tension among the troops was palpable. They knew they were being watched. Late that night, Private Aaron Jewell returned from Fort Brooke with a message. Reinforcements, numbering only 50 men, would leave at first light. Dade faced a dilemma: wait for backup or press forward. Resolving to push on, Dade sent Jewell back with his decision. Meanwhile, the Seminoles continued surveillance, reporting the soldiers' movements to their leaders. The chiefs, including Osceola, strategized based on their understanding of the soldiers' reliance on their officers' commands. Osceola noted that eliminating the officers early in battle would leave the soldiers disorganized and vulnerable, like a snake without its head. On the fourth day, the drums signaled assembly, and the men forged their usual double column. Dade dispatched Pacheco ahead to scout the route to the Withlacoochee River. The march began uneventfully, but the men remained on edge, knowing an attack could occur. Suddenly, as the column made its way through the dense Florida wilderness, the Seminole warriors launched a devastating ambush. From the thick underbrush, the warriors attacked with deadly precision, firing arrows and muskets at the soldiers. Dade's command was caught completely off guard, and chaos erupted. The men fought back, but their formations were shattered, and the dense forest severely hindered their ability to defend themselves. The battle, which became known as the Dade Massacre, lasted for several hours. Despite their efforts, the soldiers were overwhelmed. Only a handful of survivors managed to escape, and Captain Dade himself was killed in the fierce confrontation. When the dust settled, nearly 110 soldiers were dead, making it one of the deadliest defeats for U.S. forces in the early days of the Second Seminole War. The aftermath of the Dade Massacre had profound consequences. The brutal attack spurred the U.S. government to commit more resources to the war, which dragged on for nearly 7 more years. The loss deeply affected the military, changing how they approached warfare in the Florida swamps and marshes. It also marked a turning point in the conflict with the Seminole people, as it showed their military capabilities and resolve. The Dade Massacre continues to be remembered as a powerful symbol of the Seminoles' fierce resistance and the heavy price paid during the U.S. military's expansion into Florida. What stood out to you the most about this event? Is there something we missed or overlooked? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to our channel for more content. Once again, we truly appreciate your support.